Well, hi there, and welcome to Mars X3D. This is your buddy Dave, and if you are new here, we're very glad you're here. You'll want to acquire your new superpower, which is X3D viewing. That's what this channel is all about. There's a link down below, and most people can learn in just a couple of minutes, and you will absolutely love it when you get it. It opens a window right onto the surface of Mars. It's like you're standing there. Very, very cool. Okay, this is episode number 5, where we start looking at some of the structures that we've found over this past year. We find what certainly appear to be either buildings or parts of buildings, walls, foundations, complete compounds, all kinds of stuff like that. So this is our best evidence from the past year of alien structures on Mars. I'm a bit surprised at this artifact from Nev's GMAC of Percy 288 and 289 for two reasons. I'm surprised that NASA left it in and left it so clearly visible. And I'm surprised no one else has pointed it out yet. This really looks like a megalithic stone wall to me. Look at the joint work, and especially look at the regular flat finishing stones that form the top, exactly as we do here on Earth. Yes, of course, this could probably occur naturally, but here's the kicker for me. How about that neat dog-leg joint right here? If the stone fractured that way, why did it retain the same beveling and distances between stones as the other pieces? Now, if there are any professional or degreed geologists out there who can explain how this formed and maybe share some examples from our own geology, I'll backpedal in a heartbeat and proclaim this to be false interpretation. That is, if your evidence clearly points that way. And by the way, I'm fully aware that no so-called serious scientist would ever watch a little minnow channel like this. But maybe one of you proud weirdos out there, you know who you are, might be acquainted with someone with the qualifications to take a serious look at this and offer an explanation. As usual, I won't hold my breath. Japan launched its second lunar orbiter back in 2007, and after reaching the moon, it eventually settled into a polar orbit that varied between 12 and 62 miles. It was nicknamed Kaguya by the Japanese people, named after a celestial moon goddess. It was eventually driven into the moon, making its final impact in August of 2009. But before it bit the dust, any number of interesting images made it back to Earth, one of which was pointed out by Sarah Runcie just the other day. When you go to the YouTube video linked below, the structures appear at the minute 50 mark. Here we can see this immense arcology inside the target area, and bear in mind, the lowest altitude Selene attained was 12 miles above the lunar surface. These ruins are absolutely huge. Let's zoom in. These are spectacular ruins that would be miles high. But there's something I'd like you to notice before we go any further. All of the outlined areas have been carefully and rather obviously blurred out, just exactly the way NASA blurs out its own images of the moon and other bodies. And that tells me one thing. Whoever is issuing the mandates to hide these things from us are operating at a global level, not a national one. Isn't it interesting that nobody wants to buck this mandate, that everyone just knuckles under without a hint of disobedience? And that in turn tells me that the real rulers of this planet have an agenda that has absolutely nothing to do with our own well-being, nothing to do with our ultimate growth as a species, and everything to do with maintaining the status quo at all costs. Those costs would include disease, starvation, war, political corruption, and a whole lot more, but you get the picture. That's a discussion for another time and another place. But that does beg the question, just how awake are you? Only you can answer that. In any case, this image so plainly shows archaeological ruins that I'm not even going to analyze it. But look at the shapes, the symmetries, and try to get a feel for how ancient this must be. Let's get just a bit closer. What do you see here? And what about that honeycombed area in the center? This is an amazing find, and we thank Sarah Runcie for bringing it to our attention. You'll recall that last week we featured a gigantic structure that was found on the moon with the Japanese Selene lunar orbiter. And one of our sharp-eyed viewers, Fakri Kayat, found another one at the 2:37 time mark, and you can see it right there in that crater. Now, you might remember from the last episode that the Selene orbiter varies from 12 to 62 miles in its orbit, and so the closest this could be is maybe 12 miles above the lunar terrain. This crater is about 5 or 6 miles across, so you see the big cube on the right-hand side. That is large. That's about a mile across, folks. So let's break it down a little bit, see what we've got. You can see they've tried to blur it out, but there's another cube almost as big as the first one, just off to the left. And did you notice these towers, spires, if you will, and what might be buildings, all on kind of a rectangular base right in front? And what about this structure here? Now bear in mind, there's no atmosphere on Mars, at least that's what we're told. And so you don't have half-lit objects. It's either full shadow or full sunlight. So that tells me that whatever this is, besides being really large, that it's that gray color and that it's in the sunlight. And there's one more thing, in case you haven't already noticed. See how most of the crater is blurred out, both inside and outside? Our takeaway on this is that if Japan is doing the same obfuscation that NASA is, and that Europe, ESA, the United Arab Emirates, India, Chinese, whoever else is putting rovers and probes up there, are doing the same thing. They're hiding stuff from us. That tells us that whoever's really calling the shots is above national sovereignty, and that everybody is towing the line for whatever reason. So just continue to enjoy your status, along with me, as a free-range slave. Here's another one pointed out by Rami from Percy 203. This one was shot with the stereo Z-cam, which always makes my job a lot easier. The purple arrow points out what might be a wall in front, and the magenta arrow is pointing at that strange overhang in the background. And here's one thing you should know about the citation link for this one. It goes to the NASA website, and as far as I know, there's no longer a way to link directly to the image involved. Maybe one of you is more hip to that situation than I am, but the deal is you gotta enter the sol number and the camera in the search field. Then search through the images to find the one that matches. Yep, our tax dollars at work once again. Anyway, for once we have a good, clear image with lots of sunlight close by and good detail. This really does look like a wall to me. Those rocks on the bottom, they're so squared off and perfect, it's hard to imagine a natural process making that happen. The boulder on top has a trapezoidal end in the shade. It fits perfectly on top of the wall blocks, and it even seems to have kind of a 45-degree bevel on the sunlit side. Having been subjected to millennia of thermal erosion and wind-driven sand, it still seems to have weathered the passage of time relatively intact. And really, what's up with this thing? Sure, it could be a stone that had softer rock or sand worn away beneath it, but it sure seems to be anchored pretty good since it shows no sign of tipping over. You may recall in the last episode we had a good look at some wall sections, some alphabets, that type of thing, and we have found another one. Again, we're in the same GMAC. We haven't left this yet, so if you click the link down below, there's a ton of stuff for you to look at. This really looks like a wall section to me. And some of you are going to say, well, that's just a boulder that's been cracked. Okay, let's take that central crack and run down to the bottom, and it ends in a circular hole. Have you ever seen a crack do that? And then the way the stones are melded together on the right side, the way the crack follows the contour. Now, some of you might say, okay, Dave, you're just looking at a rock. Knock it off. But remember we talked about looking at an image with an archaeologist's eye? Take a look at this. All the way in back there, on the right, a perfectly rectangular block. And moving from left to right in the foreground, a rectangular block with even scoops taken out of it. And then another rectangular block, and then another rectangular block, and then another, under the sand, rectangular block. And of course there's more in this image that I didn't point out. But you're starting to get the idea, I hope. And I didn't want to leave this image until I pointed out those three little balls in back, perfectly spaced, perfectly sized, all the same size in a row. That looks decorative to me. The only other explanation, it is three boulders in a row, tiny boulders in a row, that have been eroded into an almost circular shape and somehow landed in exactly the same position in a line and equally distant from each other. You tell me which explanation works better. So let's take a deep dive into the abyssal plains off the western coast of Cuba, Guanahassabibes Peninsula. And these are sonar images that were first captured in 2001. They cover about 2 square kilometers at 2,500 feet deep. That's deep. Now, it was discovered by marine engineer Pauline Zalitsky and her husband, Paul Weinswig, and their company's Advanced Digital Communications. They were working on a contract for the Cuban government. Anyway, there's a marine geologist named Manuel Iturralde who estimated their age at 50,000 years. He says the structures are out of time and out of place. And so far, no expeditions are planned. Can you believe that? After 21 years? no one is interested in checking this out? That's the state of modern science in today's world. My friend Mesa was responsible for posting the information about the pyramid complex you just saw. And here is another offering from him. You need to check out his Star 2 archives on Facebook. Man, it's a great place, a great resource. He just got back up after Facebook deleted his entire archives. And so give him a little love. Head on over there. Give him some support. Anyway, this is an orbital view from Apollo 12. And this was taken, actually, as a film image. It was taken with a Hasselblad. So there's no digital funny stuff going on in here. And there are a few things we need to take a look at. Here's one that Mesa pointed out, some kind of bridge or pipeline that cuts directly across a crater from rim to rim. Now, how does that form naturally? The moon is not supposed to be active in any erosional sense other than micrometeorites. So how does a bridge form crossing an impact crater? Well, we don't know, but there it is. Now, bear in mind, too, this is from orbit. And, of course, we're zoomed in a good bit. But this is a huge structure. As I poked around in this image, I found a couple of other things that I wanted to share with you. And I'll let you look at this for just a moment to see if your eyes can pick out some of the things that I see. Many of you have already seen the right angles and the squares and the walls that appear to be buildings or foundations over here on the left. But there's a lot more in this image. Here, the yellow arrow is pointing out a perfectly hexagonal crater, a six-sided crater. Now, that doesn't happen naturally, and of course we have found a great many six-sided craters, not only on the moon, but also on Mars. And then we have these other squares and right angles and walls in the side of the square here. But did you notice that little arrow? It's pointing right at a tower, a white tower that's on a square base. Now, the 3D is a little bit wonky on this one because of the orbit and the angle at which the image was taken. But I'll let you look at this one for a moment or two as well and see what you pick out. More straight walls arranged in a perpendicular way to each other, but you know, it's that big wall that jogs upwards and has something sticking out into the sunlight on the left. I can't tell whether it's a pipe or another piece of the wall. I just don't know. But definitely not natural. And of course, this structure or complex over here on the right with the perfectly formed semicircle cut out, walls and squares, and, well, I don't know what it is, but once again, it sure doesn't belong on the moon's surface. Elsewhere in Nev's GMAC of Percy 395 North, we have this very interesting item off in the distance. Now, for any of you who are perhaps archaeologists or a citizen archaeologist like myself, you immediately recognize this as a tell. Now, a tell is a mound that covers a buried structure, something that gives away the location of an archaeological find. This one in particular has some very interesting aspects to it. Now, when you look at this, the first thing that I see are those clear right angles, the lighter portion that outline some kind of rectangular and triangular shaped structure that lies beneath the sand. You've probably already noticed the structures that are within the box there on the right side. We don't know what they are, but it's clear that they exhibit non-fractal angles. They're rectangular in nature according to the light and the shadows. They're regularly spaced. And so, we can speculate, is this an entrance? Is it a ramp going in? Is it a defensive wall? Just hard to say. And by the way, notice all the blue stones scattered in front in the foreground. Just about every one of those is an anomalous stone as well, and it just reinforces my belief that a massive city was utterly destroyed in Jezero crater. And by the way, before we zoom in and get really, really blurry, did you notice any of the structural items on the left? Let's get really close. And by the way, if you're not viewing this in X3D, it won't make any sense to you. For the rest of you who are in the 21st century with me, it'll make sense in just a moment. This area of the tell has some very interesting features, which I personally believe NASA has masked out, either through the exposure process or an overlay of sand or whatever. So we're going to adjust the contrast rather radically and point these things out for you. The arrow is pointing out a line of spherical structures, which even with the contrast radically adjusted, are still kind of hard to see. But I'm looking at, starting from the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, maybe 8 spheres all in a row. And over here on the right, we have what really does look like, to me, to be a little structure, like almost a little house or something. I mean, look at the rectangular windows, the roof, the wall in front, if that's what it is. And there's more, as usual. And just look at the walls and structures inside this yellow box. Now, maybe they're roads, I don't know, but I'm thinking they're walls and portions of structures that have collapsed. So once again, those of you who are new to this, I hope that you're seeing this tell with different eyes now. Here's a great find by Andrew Lane. It's simple, it's close, it's clear, and it really does appear to be a well-formed stucco-covered wall and with a couple of seams in it. So let me rotate this to put it more in perspective. Maybe this is a little bit easier to understand for some of you. It does put it in perspective. And, it's really hard to think that that's anything but a wall. Now, could it be explained by a geological process? Well, I believe it could. But, everything's so symmetrical. The angles are so clean. It just seems artificial to me. Beautiful square-ended block in front and to the right. Is that by chance? Well, you've heard me say before that if you find an anomaly, normally there are several others around it. And I'll bet you've already found the other one. And that, of course, is this beautifully rounded piece off to the left. And it does appear to have what could be a staircase cut into it. Here's the thing. When you find 3 non-fractal anomalies in close proximity to each other, that eliminates the object of geological interest classification. These are artifacts. This is one of those wide panorama shots that NASA puts together. I processed it as a hyper stereo, that is, as if you were a giant with your eyes 100 feet apart. That makes the whole scene appear as a model and also makes it easier to see the panorama. What we're interested in is that tiny area inside the green target, probably a mile to a mile and a half from the camera. As you focus your eyes inside the white box, you can see what seems to be a medieval fortress with multiple levels, what might be arches or openings, and a couple of towers. My particular interest is inside the circle. We're going to zoom all the way in just a moment, so it'll be very blurry, but there are some very interesting details there that I wanted to show you. Forget about the focus or lack of it for a moment and just become aware of the shapes, the lighting, and the shadows as I point out a few things. Let's start with this 4-story domed structure gleaming white in the sun. After all the years I've been doing this, I do not hesitate to call this an artificial structure. Then there are these 4 white buildings marching up the slope by the tower. They're all identical in their cubical shape, and they all reflect the sunlight in the same way. It's possible that this might be a small pyramid. Look at the straight line demarcating the sunlit side from the shadowed side. Whatever it is, it's artificial. This corner structure is clearly non-fractal, with a perfect 90-degree angle that's easy to see despite the blurry magnification. But now, look very closely in the shaded portion. Do you see the square, lighter colored divisions cutting the structure up into big cubes? Here I've drawn lines over the divisions so maybe you can see them a bit better. This entire segment of Martine's fortress is, in my opinion, so clearly artificial that it stands alone from the rest of the fortress. The portion Martine pointed out in her post is almost certainly artificial, but there's a slight chance it could be geological in origin as well. But this corner section we just looked at off to the right clinches the deal, at least for me. This is an artifact, an artificial structure erected by intelligent agency. You've heard me say it before, for all you anomaly hunters out there, be sure to check the horizon, because NASA, as a rule, usually doesn't take the time to hide the stuff that's off in bumfuzzle Egypt. They'll usually wash things out in the background, but that can be fixed. That lump off there in the distance caught my eye. So let's get a bit closer and see what we have. That looks suspicious to me. I'm aware, just like you, that this could well be a geological feature, what we call an oogie, or an object of geological interest. It's going to get blurry as we get in a little closer, but I think it's worth a look. Those regular sections with what might be openings, plus that white top. Is this just interesting geology, or could it be an ancient, crumbling, and by the way, gigantic structure? As we continue to look out to the horizon, I wish this was more clear, but it seems to me that those are walls on top of this mesa, with a cluster of buildings off to the right. Now, some of you may be saying, I just don't know about that, oh Imperial Galactic Overlord. Well, just hang on a moment. My friend Mesa is an excellent researcher. He's got a wonderful Facebook site called Star 2. That's linked down below. Why not head over there and give him some love? Now, to be fair, both Chokri Yaish and Sarah Runcie lay claim to making this find, and as you know, with so many eyes on these images from all around the world, there's a good bit of overlap involved. I personally don't give a pig's whistle for who found it first. I just want to show them to you and give credit whenever possible. As far as I know, Mesa was the first one to point this out, but kudos also to Chokri and to Sarah. This entire mesa, and indeed all the mesas in this NavCam GMAC, seem to have ruins all over them. I put a box around the most obvious ones where you can clearly see the box-like structures of ancient walls. Can we be honest for just a moment? If you saw this image and were told it was an old black and white photo from an archaeological expedition in the Middle East, you wouldn't hesitate to call these ruins, would you? But for some reason, when we find things like this on Mars, we get mocked and told we have pareidolia or just have feverish imaginations, and that, of course, these things are only a trick of light, shadow, and geology. I have a technical phrase I like to use with such willfully blind people. Bite me. I realize this particular view is a challenge, especially if you're new to X3D viewing. But as you relax your eyes into this image, what do you see as you slowly scan from left to right? Pay attention to the shapes formed by light and shadow. In my opinion, this is an extensive compound covering the entire area, and it seems to have a fortified wall surrounding the entire complex. Let me break it down into sections as we take a closer look. I know it's blurry, but as I look around, I see structures that incorporate squares, rectangles, triangles, spheres, and domes. And that dark wall in front appears to have spheres lined along the top. As we move to the right side of the compound, you can clearly see the wall in front and also in back. We see lighter colored structures, nicely aligned, almost as if there were streets or plazas between them. And take a look at this if you haven't already noticed it. Inside the box, there seems to be a structure like a Quonset hut. You know, you can see that the lower portion is white, and the roof is a dark color, perfectly curving over the structure. And it's clear to me that this is a dome. There are more domes in this image, but this one is the easiest to see. Well, that might be one of the longest episodes I've ever done, but we have a good one coming up on pyramids, episode 6. So stay safe, stay weird, and be well. See you then.